need a high-end designer or a lot of money to get a luxe look. Be your own interior designer.
This is Affordable Interior Design, the podcast.
Here's your host, Betsy Helmuth.
The first one comes from Mayan, and Mayan's writing from Houston, Texas. She says, "Hi, Betsy. I'm currently decorating my home with a shabby chic feel. My home is a small, open concept space with a big wall full of windows that face the yard. Some are seated windows and others are thin and tall. We currently have blinds, but I do not like the look. I want curtains, but I don't want to overwhelm the space. How can I decorate these windows? Please help." Well, first of all, Mayan, I do not blame you for being anxious and having questions. Dressing windows is very complicated. It's not always straightforward, and each window has its own challenges. And when we're trying to design a space that has many, many windows, how do we make this space feel cohesive while treating the windows differently because they are different? Now, in your case, I'm scrolling through these pictures, and yes, you have one very long wall that has, in this picture, 5 windows on it, but one of the windows is more inset. It has a deeper ledge. Now, I would not call it like a seated window by any chance, or by any means, I mean. And I don't know what you meant by seated window. I was thinking window seat. But looking at these pictures, I don't see anything like that here. So I'm just seeing a series of windows, one of which has a deeper ledge. But the other thing that's exciting me is that these windows tend to be at the same height visually. So I actually think we can treat these windows very similarly. I think this is a pretty easy solve. So I'm excited about that. Now, as you know from listening to this podcast for eons, and if you haven't been listening for eons, well, what are you waiting for? There's nearly 400 episodes for you to sink your teeth into. But this is going to be very straightforward. What I would do is you have, an L shape. As I mentioned, there's that long wall that has 4 very similar windows. Then in the dining room, it has a slightly deeper ledge, but it's the same height and it's 3 windows kind of right in a row together. And then the wall perpendicular to that leads out, it looks out, onto the patio, is one of the same windows that we saw in that line of windows on that big wall. So everything is at relatively the same height, give or take an inch. Everything has been treated with white slatted blinds. And in my opinion, a fully dressed window has both blinds and drapes. Now, the blinds are meant to be manipulated, opened, closed, louvered, depending on what type of light and privacy you want, whereas the drapes tend to stay at the side, flank the window, add color, pattern, texture, height, but they aren't typically manipulated. You wouldn't typically close them unless you need blackout or unless your windows are quite drafty. And so you're wanting to prevent that air from getting in. You would just leave them at the side so that they kind of frame the window nicely. Now, what I like to do when I'm treating windows or when I'm deciding how to treat a window is I go to the most complicated window. So the most complicated window can mean the one closest to the corner. It can mean the one that's kind of the oddest in shape, like the dining room window that has 3 windows stuck together. It can mean one that sort of sticks out as different. In this case, the one that sticks out as most different is that dining room window that is a little bit inset with the deeper ledge. I would say it has a 6-inch ledge, and the other windows have a 3-inch ledge. So it's not even all that different, right? But the other difference for this window is that the glass doesn't go all the way to the sides with the window frame. There is a piece of wall that's, again, about 6 inches between the side of the window frame and the corner of the window box, or where the ledge begins. So I would say that that's a little bit different as well. Keeping those 2 things in mind, I would do Okay, let me tell you something else. Did you guys put on your thinking caps today? There's one other thing I feel like I might want to tell you. I'm on the fence here. Now, I'm going to assume that you're never going to draw these drapes. But if I look at the other side of this deep dining room window, I can see that there's only about 8 inches from the window box, right, to the corner of the room. And that's troubling me, maybe not. No, I'm not going to let it trouble me, because what I would do here in this much wider window is I would use a double wide panel. Typically, you want double the width of drapery that you have width of window. And I'm going to guesstimate here that you have like 115 inches of window in terms of the width. That's just a guesstimate. Between 100 and 115. So that means that each panel needs to be 100 or 115. And we know that panels come in between 40 and 50 so inch widths. So we would need two double wide panels. That means that each panel would be 100 inches on either side of this long dining room window. And we would hang the rod up above the window box and hang it so that it brushes the floor. Now, what we want to do is go with a standard size of drape. You don't want to have to get this hemmed. So hopefully you'll find something. I'm eyeballing this and thinking the 96-inch range would work well. Because if the 96 doesn't work, then you have to go 108. And I think you'd have to get it hemmed at that point. So anyway, I would hang the rod, the bracket on the rod, outside the window box like 4 inches, because that will cover that weird space between the window frame and the corner of the window inset box where it meets the ledge. Meaning, I know this is kind of granular, guys. I hope you guys had coffee. Meaning that we're not going to see that weird piece of window. Meaning that this is going to give it a much more homogeneous look with the other windows, because the other windows are going to be so much easier to treat. So we went 4 inches outside, and we'll do the same thing on the other side of the window, 4 inches outside, so that it covers that weird little void, and it's going to brush the floor. Then with all the other windows, you're going to hang the rod at the same height that you did the dining room window, as well as having them brush. The amount outside could vary, although in this case, I don't think it should. I would do 4 inches outside, but on these windows, you'll do a single panel wide drape, because these are much narrower windows. I'm eyeballing it at 36 inches wide. That will be the perfect thing, and will make everything really flow. We'll really break up this long wall of windows and add color, pattern, texture, softness. I think the room desperately needs window treatments. So I'm glad you wrote in. And even though that was a very long-winded explanation, I hope it's applied to a lot of your situations for those of you listening, because window treatments are very tricky. And once you know some of the rules, you're able to apply them to lots of different scenarios. So I've shared lots of different rules. So hopefully you guys can find a nugget or a bit of information that will work for your situation. A big thank you to Aton and the Embassy, who wrote our theme song. A shout out to Catherine Heller, who owns the podcast shop and is our editor extraordinaire. We also want to thank Ginny Sunasan and her team at the Savvy Podcast Agency for their help with our social, our YouTube channel, and so much more. We also want to thank Uploft, which is our parent company who supports this podcast. And lastly, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and for all your support.